guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Danny Phantom. Alright then, welcome back to Danny Phantom Month. Today is the second day, so we are going to start, well, technically third because of streaming, but, you know. Today is the second day I'm recording for you guys, and today we are going to be reviewing the episode One of a Kind. And this episode, well, it introduces us to one of Danny's more prolific villains. It's probably one of the more iconic villains of the well, actually there's a couple, but this introduces us to one of the most iconic villains in the series, the Box Ghost. But yeah, no, this episode does introduce Box Ghost, but for the most part, it introduces the villain Skulker, who wants to hunt Danny for being different. Essentially, he wants to hunt Danny for being unique, because, you know, he's half ghost. But in any case, the episode opens up with us meeting the Box Ghost and Danny in the middle of quote-unquote fighting him. I should establish, the Box Ghost is maybe Danny's most iconic, but it has to be said, least dangerous villain. So, yeah, the Box Ghost is a recurring villain throughout the entirety of the run, and the Box Ghost is notable for not being, well, he's essentially the joke villain of the series. He's essentially this character who nobody takes very seriously, and for good reason. He is very iconic. He has a lot of fun lines. But essentially, how he introduces himself is Danny's in the middle of fighting him in the middle of an abandoned warehouse, and he introduces himself as the master of all containers, cardboard, and square. And essentially, what that means is that he has telekinetic abilities which enable him to move boxes, and that's about it. So yeah, and in theory, this could potentially make him dangerous. The Box Ghost has an ability where he is essentially the Box Ghost. On paper, this doesn't sound dangerous, but in practice, the Box Ghost has access to potentially heavy things that could very seriously hurt someone if he throws it at someone. So on paper, the Box Ghost can be dangerous. In execution, the Box Ghost can be dangerous, but he probably won't be. For the most part, there aren't many episodes where he's considered a serious threat. So I say many because there is one where he is a serious threat, but for the most part, he's just the joke villain. He's essentially just the character. He's essentially just the character who's used as a punchline, and that's about it. And sure enough, his main ability is he just proceeds to start chucking boxes at Danny with his telekinetic powers. And also one of his other main catchphrases, other than shouting his name at people, "I am the Box Ghost, beware," is he will state the name of. He will threaten them to be covered in the belongings of insert a return address here. So yeah, that's essentially his other thing, is that when he's about to do an attack, he will read one of the return addresses to figure out who exactly the stuff he's throwing belongs to before throwing it at somebody. And of course, Danny is not amused, claiming he doesn't really have time for this, but And of course, he eventually yells at Tucker and Sam to get into the warehouse so that he can actually deal with the ghost. And of course, Tucker is screwing around holding the Phantom Thermos and just waving around, spinning it around on his finger like a basketball. Whole bunch of things he shouldn't be doing. But eventually, Danny is able to, well, very quickly defeat the Box Ghost and they trap him in the thermos. And he utters a "good night, everybody," which is a reference to the fact that he is voiced by Ron Perlman, who also voiced Yakko Warner from Animaniacs, and that is a reference to one of Yakko's most iconic lines, where there will be an innuendo, and then Yakko will utter a "good night, everybody." So yeah, it's a reference to that specifically because that was one of his roles that he did. Recently, I think, because I think it was in 1998 and this was in 2002, but yeah, it was a recent role for him at the time, so you know that was what he was referencing. But in any case, with that, Danny is satisfied that they caught the ghosts, and And it's at this point where Sam pulls out a textbook and quizzes Danny on what a seal is, and of course Danny points out that they're mammals that bark and points out that they're clearly a dog, but of course Sam points out that that's wrong, and this of course causes Danny to become frustrated because that's the 21st question in a row he's gotten wrong. So and that's unfortunate, and unfortunately he points out that he's probably not going to be passing his biology test. And of course Danny then proceeds to point out that if he's going to be doing this and he's going to be a superhero, that they need to start taking it seriously as his sidekicks. Obviously, pointing out to Sam that her job is to help him study for his biology test so he doesn't fail. And he yells at Tucker, who points out that Tucker's job is to catch all of the ghosts so that he has time to study. So of course he snaps at both of them, but Tucker points out that it's completely fine, that they've got it completely under control, and remarks that they'll be fine, and that they've got all the ghosts are safe and sound inside the Fenton thermos. But remember when I said he was twirling around on his finger like a dumbass? Yeah, he drops the Fenton thermos and all the ghosts get out, including the box ghost who expresses freedom before leaving. And it's at this point where Tucker's PDA goes off, and he remarks that according to his schedule, Danny was supposed to be done with ghost hunting by now, and Danny just shoots him a dirty look before going off to go round up all the ghosts that they just let go. And of course, unbeknownst to all of them, they're actually being watched by the Skulker, Skulker is revealed to, and he's interested in Danny because Danny is a half ghost, which makes him unique. And of course, Skulker then proceeds to express his interest in catching Danny and adding him to his collection. And it's at this point where he reveals that he has a giant cage full of various unique ghosts that he's caught. And it's at this point where the box ghost shows up to try and steal his cage of ghosts. But Skulker tells him that if he touches the cage, he will skin him alive and put his pelt on his wall. So the box ghost just utters a beware at them before leaving. And of course, that's where the conflict of the episode opens up. So it opens up. So of course, it then proceeds to go on to the family eating breakfast. The Danny's mom and dad are working on a new gadget. And it's at this point where Jazz proceeds to barge in, and she proceeds to reveal that it finally came, and of course everybody's confused as to what she's talking about. So Jazz proceeds to explain how there's a magazine called Women's IQ, and everybody's confused because Jack, of course, immediately believes it's the swimsuit issue, but of course she proceeds to explain how it's not actually about swimsuits or anything like that. She explains that it is a magazine for women geniuses, made by women geniuses, and about women geniuses. So essentially, it is a women's magazine, and also expresses her idea that she wants to put mom in the cover of the magazine, so that they can have an article about their family. And of course, Danny thinks this is initially a good idea, but then realizes that it is going to be the swimsuit issues, but is also kind of grossed out that his mom might be in the swimsuit issue of Women's IQ. But Jazz points out that both of the guys are missing the point. That it's not about like swimsuits or anything like that. It's literally just going to showcase how much of a brilliant mind her mom has, so that Maddie can kind of get some recognition for her inventions, for her achievements, and not so much for the ghost hunting thing. Because obviously Jazz doesn't believe in the whole ghost hunting aspect of their quote unquote research and inventing, and he just wants to demonstrate that they're a bit of a normal family. But Jack, of course, points out that that it would have been a perfect opportunity to unveil the new invention, the Ghost Gabber, and then proceeds to remark that the way it works is that it translates whatever a ghost is saying into information that humans can pick up. And of course, he then proceeds to hand it to Danny, of course, who asks him to test it out. And so Danny just whispers a boo into it, and of course it then proceeds to translate that into essentially text-to-speech is essentially how it works. He spoke into it, and it responds, "I am a ghost, fear me." And this, of course, causes everybody to become a little bit wary of Danny, because they're a little confused as to why the machine's not working quite right. And but Danny just remarks that he's got to go to school and get ready for his test. At which point the machine then proceeds to spit out exactly what he just said, but adding "fear me" at the end of it. And Danny decides to make himself scarce and immediately leave. But of course, Jazz points out that this is exactly what she's talking about, and points out that obviously the whole weird that she wants to kind of get on track to having a normal family and not just a family of ghost hunters, and points out that the women's IQ interview will absolutely be perfect for that. And of course, Jack, points out but of course, Maddie points out that she's not going to just be there by herself. Pointing out that obviously she points out that she and Jack have always been a team, and for that reason, she doesn't want to do the interview without Jack. Pointing out that even though he's not a woman, she wants to point out that for every brilliant woman, there's always a brilliant man by their side. And of course, Jack is very proud to be part of the interview, pointing out that it's the perfect opportunity to demonstrate that their family is a family of geniuses. In any case, it then cuts to Danny failing biology. So, essentially what happens is Danny is got a D on his biology test and is now worried that his parents are going to kill him. And Tucker points out that it's so much for his family being a family of geniuses. So, of course, it's this point where Danny points out that his parents are probably going to kill him, and he needs to find some way to get his grade up. And of course, now Sam then proceeds to chime in with her own personal idea that she thinks will give Danny a good grade on biology. At which point she proceeds to reveal the purple-backed gorilla, and specifically a specimen named Samson, who happens to live at the Amity Park Zoo where they live. And of course Danny is a little confused at first, but then she proceeds to explain how the purple-backed gorilla is extremely rare, pointing out that only 2 exist and they're both male. And she proceeds to point out that it would be a perfect opportunity to get his grade up by studying something about the purple-backed gorilla that Danny has never actually nobody else has ever actually figured out. And also points out that it is a majestic creature that deserves to be free, and a bunch of other things. And Danny likes the idea of studying the purple-backed gorilla, but also points out that he really wishes that a lot of Sam's ideas weren't agenda-driven. But in case after getting a plan for the purple-backed gorilla and realizing that would be a perfect article for them to research and read, Tucker also decides that it's also clear that Danny needs better time management. So Tucker then proceeds to decide that he will be Danny's time manager, using his PDA to list a series of scheduling and other things that Danny might need, and also pointing out that and also kind of makes fun of Sam for making him drop the thermos, and also kind of insinuates that she was the one who made him drop the thermos, even though it was Tucker screwing around, not taking it seriously, that caused the thermos to drop and let all the ghosts loose. So yeah, unfortunately, Tucker just kind of blames Sam for everything that didn't happen. So yeah, and of course, Sam is obviously very visibly annoyed, but also remembers that. But also, Danny points out that obviously that thing didn't work out too great when he let Tucker handle the Fenton thermos, which is why Tucker put in a memo into his PDA not to let Tucker handle the thermos. So, of course, Danny decides to put it on a bit of a trial run for the time being until it proves that this is either going to work or it isn't. So, and Tucker's happy to be the manager, and with that, they then proceed to schedule their time to go to the zoo, and they proceed to leave. Meanwhile, Skulker comes in. Skulker faces through the wall, realizing he just missed Danny. Then decides to go look at the to go look at the article that they looked up on the purple-back gorilla, and starts looking into and realizing that the purple-back gorilla is at the Amity Park Zoo. He decides to go to the Amity Park Zoo to look into to make sure that he can catch Danny and add him to his collection. It's at this point where this nerdy-ish kid comes in and asks Skulker if he's supposed to be there, also pointing out that he's not a student, and also if he's finished with the computer. It's at this point where Skulker then proceeds to net the kid to the wall, and the kid starts screaming. And Skulker asks if he thought he could get the drop on him, pointing out that he's the greatest trapper in the ghost world, and that there was no way the kid was ever going to be sneak up on him. But the kid just proceeds to not really care and just continues to scream. And Skulker remarks that they're in a library and that he probably shouldn't be screaming, so he uses ectoplasm to seal the kid's mouth shut, and then leaves. And it's at this point where Dash and his friend from the football team walk in, and Dash wonders if his friend was the one who did that, and his friend remarks that no, he didn't, but he can also always appreciate some high-quality bullying. At which point the net and the ectoplasm fade because Skulker is no longer anywhere near the kid, and the kid falls off the wall. And of course, in any case, it then cuts to Sam, Tucker, and Danny being at the Amity Park Zoo in the observation tower, and they are watching over Samson's enclosure and are just watching him, do gorilla things essentially. He's scratching his butt, he's beating his chest, he's doing a whole bunch of things regarding just basic gorilla behavior, and of course, Sam is the only one kind of interested in Samson and how he's waving his arms around and a whole bunch of other things. So, of course, Danny points out that they've been at it for hours and they haven't discovered anything interesting about the purple-back gorillas and about Samson in particular. And he's starting to get a little bit sleepy, admittedly. But Tucker points out that this is Sam points out that this is their chance to actually look into this purple-back gorilla and how majestic a creature it is. But by this point, Danny's already fallen asleep and nodded off. And Sam, realizing that she's not going to be able to get to Danny because he's asleep, then asks Tucker if he can wake him up. And since he's his time manager, but Tucker is also nodding himself and fall asleep. And then they start cuddling in their sleep, which is funny. And of course, Sam is annoyed because she realizes that she's on her own, but then decides to take the opportunity to take a picture, pointing out that it'll be funny for the yearbook. And of course, she then proceeds to snap a picture of them with her camera, and then proceeds to go back to watching the purple-back gorilla. Meanwhile, Skulker has appeared in a net in what is it, the lion's cage, where he's currently watching the purple-back gorilla and is trying to figure out why exactly Danny would be interested in it. But also then proceeds to try and figure out where Danny is using his viewfinder. And Danny then proceeds to look around, and he does eventually. And eventually, while he's looking around, the tiger realizes that somebody is in his enclosure and tries to attack Skulker, which goes about as well as you'd expect because Skulker is an expert trapper. He is skilled at catching things. So naturally, when the tiger tries to attack him, he just attacks it instead and ties it up in his nets and other things. Meanwhile, Samson hears all of this from his enclosure and starts banging on the cage. And Sam, who has come down to get a closer look, sees that something is clearly bothering Samson. And so she decides to try and figure out what's going on. Samson, of course, is gesturing toward the cage where he saw Skulker, and Sam, of course, can't really understand him because he's a gorilla. So eventually concludes that he probably wants out. So she decides, and because her entire thing in this episode is that obviously she thinks that he's a majestic creature that deserves to go free. So she proceeds to let him out of his cage, and at which point Skulker eventually subdues the tiger and emerges from its cage and proceeds to make his way toward Danny. But then on his viewfinder, he discovers a gorilla alert about a gorilla trying to attack him. And then he eventually sees that, yes, Samson proceeds to attack him, and then absolutely beats the shit out of Skulker. Like, obviously it is a one-sided fight because, you know, you're not winning against a gorilla. Let's be perfectly honest. Gorillas are the kind of creatures who you don't really order around to do literally, if you tell a gorilla to do literally anything, there's a very good chance it will beat you to death with your own arms because it's a gorilla. Of course that's how that's going to work out for you. It's not going to go great. But in any case, Skulker tries and fails to fight back against him by trying to use ectoplasm its eyes so that he can't see, and then trying to catch him in the net. But the gorilla, but it's just a gorilla. You don't fight a gorilla. That's a dumb idea. And yeah, of course, Samson then proceeds to grab the net as Skulker is trying to catch him in it, and proceeds to swing him around over his head. So yeah, Skulker not having a great time fighting Samson, like at all. And eventually Skulker is smart. Skulker realizes that he needs to get out of the range of the gorilla, so he cuts the net and goes flying, which it's conveniently puts him in the observation tower with Danny and Tucker. And Sam walks in, realizing that Danny and Tucker are in danger, and tries to warn them, but Skulker ectoplasms her mouth shut so that she can't warn them about the fact that he's there. But before he can do anything to Danny, Samson proceeds to climb into the tower with them, and proceeds to attack Skulker. Skulker, of course, phases through the wall, but the sounds of a rampaging gorilla immediately wake up Danny and Tucker, who panic about the fact that they've been woken up, panic about the fact that they were cuddling, and then panic about the fact that there's a gorilla in the room with them, and in that particular order. And of course, Danny proceeds to immediately go ghost and uses his ghost powers to return Samson to his enclosure, in turning him intangible to phase him through the wall, and using his flight to return him. And remarks that he doesn't know how Samson got out, but he's going to put him back. And of course he then proceeds to do exactly that, closing the gates on the enclosure so that Samson doesn't get out again. And by this point, Sam has gotten the gunk cleaned off her mouth and tries to warn Danny about the fact that she saw a ghost. But then he interrupts her, pointing out that wondering who let the gorilla go, very, very sarcastically, and then turns to Sam and immediately suspects her as having let the gorilla go. Because, you know, that was a thing she had been saying throughout the episode that she wanted to do. And of course it's at this point where Tucker kind of joins in with Danny and points out that she shouldn't have let the gorilla go, and she's lucky they don't tell somebody about that. But it's at this point where Sam just holds up the picture of them cuddling, and and realizing that they're going to be blackmailed if they say anything, decide that that there's no real proof that she did it. They could probably forget all about that ever happening. So they proceed to decide to do that. But it's at this point where they then proceed to arrive home early in the morning, and Maddie is in the middle of her interview with a woman named Connie, and Connie is currently interviewing them about their interests and their hobbies and other things. And Jazz, of course, is trying and failing to steal the conversation away from ghost hunting. Obviously, they point out that they've made up a lot of brilliant inventions and a bunch of other things that they've made. But of course, Jack adds in that they are all ghost hunting gadgets. So, and of course, just tries to show them the ghost gabber, which of course Jazz tucks under a pillow. And so at this point where Danny of course walks in, obviously a mess from the night before because he got because of the gorilla attack. But and of course Maddie points out that he's a mess, and she points out that she doesn't really like the idea of him going out if he's going to be that much of a mess when he comes home. And he points out that he's fine, and that it was all taken care of, and that he's not going to have to that they're not going to have to worry about him. And of course, it's at this point where they wind up getting attacked by where they could then proceed to continue the interview with Connie. And of course, Connie does, as expected, does start to lose interest once Maddie points out that all of her inventions are indeed ghost hunting as her main interest. And she points out that a lot of her inventions are designed with ghosts in mind. she proceeds to explain. She proceeds to explain things like the Fenton thermos, which traps ghosts, the ghost portal, a couple of other things they've invented. And Jazz, of course, tries to continues to cut her off. But of course, through Jazz, Connie ultimately winds up becoming interested in Danny and some of the things he's done. So she becomes more interested in Danny than she does Maddie and Jack, who are obviously just rambling about ghosts. You know, not the kinds of things you should be talking about. But of course, Danny points out that he just wants the day to be over with. At which point he goes to his room. At which point he proceeds to start to go to his room, and Tucker points out that he's obviously going to, he's obviously going to Danny now actually has a few minutes to rest, but also tells him that he only has a few minutes. So Danny proceeds to open the door, and of course Skulker is waiting for him and immediately traps him in a net and drags him into his room. And of course Tucker and Sam immediately panic, realizing that Danny's in trouble. But of course Sam points out that that's the ghost she saw at the zoo. And proceeds to warn Tucker about how Danny might be in danger. And of course Skulker then proceeds to reveal why he's after Danny, after trapping him in a net, pointing out that he's very interested in Danny for being unique and being one of a kind, and also points out that he's finally gets to see Danny in his natural habitat. And of course Danny is annoyed about the fact that he's been trapped, and of course Skulker proceeds to tell him that he's surprised Danny didn't put up more of a fight. But it's at this point where Danny points out that he shouldn't worry because he will. At which point he goes ghost and proceeds to fight Skulker in his room. And of course they start hearing, and of course Jack and Maddie are in the middle of their interview when they start hearing something going on, and of course it's at this point where obviously Sam and Tucker try to play everything off as everything's fine, nothing to worry about, and of course that doesn't wind up working. But of course they start to try and explain how everything should be fine. There's nothing they need to worry about. There's nothing that's going to be a problem, and everything about all of that. They don't need to worry about literally anything because Danny's just lifting weights in his room. And of course Maddie points out that Danny doesn't have weights in his room, and points out that's why he's using. And they hear Danny mutter something about breaking a computer. So they play it off as, oh yeah, that's why he's using his computer instead to lift weights. And of course this causes Connie to become interested in Danny as a possible potential interviewee, pointing out that he obviously shows telltale signs of a shut-in genius. So she decides to kind of arrange for an interview to go talk with him, and Jazz of course jumps at the opportunity to do that. But in case at this point where Skulker then proceeds to use his phasing powers to knock Danny into the basement, and then proceeds to use his suit to hijack the ghost portal and open it, and declares that and then tells Danny what he intends to do with him. About now that he has Danny trapped, he's going to lock him in a cage and put him on display at his zoo he owns, and where he will be essentially be gawked at for the rest of his days by people who have never seen a half ghost before. This of course causes Danny to start panicking, but it's at this point where Sam then proceeds to intervene, and then proceeds to go on a rant about how it's wrong for someone like Danny to be locked in a cage, the same way it's wrong for Samson to be locked in a cage. And she just of course Danny takes the opportunity to free himself from Skulker's grasp and knock him around. But in the process, he accidentally knocks Skulker into Tucker, who winds up dropping his PDA. And Skulker, seeing the PDA and noting how sleek and seemingly advanced it is, for the time at least. I mean, it was the 2000s. It's not that particularly advanced nowadays. But he picks up the PDA, and of course Tucker he picks up the PDA and integrates it into his armor. And Tucker expresses his anger at Skulker, pointing out that he had 3 payments paid off on it and he can't just take it. But Skulker proceeds to shove him away and ignore him, and sure enough proceeds to integrate his PDA into his systems, which causes Skulker to become more powerful. And Sam, of course, yells at Tucker for realizing what he just did, about how he just made the bad guy even more bad. But Tucker also points out that he had no idea his PDA was ghost compatible, and you can't really blame him for that. So, and of course, Skulker now has some new weapons and successfully overpowers Danny. But right as he's about to capture Danny, the PDA starts sinking into Tucker's schedule that he made for Danny. At which point he tells him to go look into a book. At which point he tells Skulker to go look into a book on purpleback gorillas. And Skulker's jetpack then proceeds to activate on its own, and he proceeds to fly off, with nobody fully understanding what exactly is going on, but realizing that they now have a moment to figure that out. But of course, at this point where they hear somebody, and of course, Skulker turns intangible to get out of the house, and Jack picks up on the fact that Skulker is there, but doesn't fully understand that there's a ghost in the house. He suspects something, but doesn't fully understand. But and of course, Skulker proceeds to fly off, and proceeds to fly off through the windows and through the house. And of course, Danny eventually realizes that Connie is coming to his room to interview him. So he immediately flies up into his room, realizing that it's a mess, and immediately shuts them out, telling them that they need to knock and that they shouldn't be coming in. And he proceeds to close the door, and also remarks that Jazz is probably going to kill him for that. And sure enough, she probably will later. But of course, Connie then continues to express her interest in Danny, pointing out that he clearly is a true genius, but also wishes that he was a woman. So it's at this point where the next day, Danny expresses that he's still upset about and is wondering how he's actually going to pull his grade up. But Tucker points out that he still has time in his schedule and he can continue to find research on the purpleback gorilla. It's based on the silverback gorilla, but it's a purpleback gorilla. But of course, he then proceeds to tell them that they need to that currently he just has to go to class. And of course, Sam and Danny both wonder how many PDAs he has exactly. But Tucker then proceeds to remark that he only has the 2, and it's very lucky he has a backup and had all of Danny's scheduling synced with it before he lost the old one. So of course he tells Danny that he needs to hurry up and get to class. And Skulker proceeds to appear after they leave outside of Casper High, and of course tells them that soon he will have him. And of course what proceeds to follow is a series of mishaps with Skulker. So Skulker first, of course, ambushes Danny while he's at his locker. And of course, before he can capture Danny, the PDA once again starts acting up and tells him to go look into the mating habits of purpleback gorillas. At which point, Skulker proceeds to fly off again, and Tucker is a little confused. Notes that they has the same exact thing in his own schedule. So of course he then proceeds to wonder exactly what's going on. But Danny points out that he'll figure that he clearly has to figure something out because he can't keep being ambushed by Skulker. So, but it's in case at this point where they go eat lunch on the track and field, and when Tucker opens his milk, it's revealed there's yet another trap from Skulker, who tries to capture Danny, and once again the PDA shows Danny and syncs him up to Danny's schedule, and he flies off again without wanting to, and of course he then proceeds to wonder what exactly. And of course, Tucker then proceeds to point out that that's exactly what he is scheduled for now, and Danny remarks that he should probably skip that one. And then asks Tucker what else he has scheduled, and points out that the next he has scheduled is gym. So, and asks Danny why. And which point it then cuts to Danny at gym, but having learned his lesson from the previous couple of times, he then proceeds to go dash into opening his locker for him, pointing out that he's too weak and defenseless to open his own locker, and asks Dash to do it for him. And of course, Dash proceeds to, do exactly that because, he's kind of a stand-up guy when people ask him to do things. He's a bully, of course, but he'll do something if asked, of course. And of course, he immediately gets trapped inside a bubble by Skulker, who proceeds to kind of gloat about how he's finally has him, but then realizes that he hasn't actually trapped Danny. And by the time he realizes that Danny is hiding behind a wall and he caught the wrong person, the PDA starts acting up again, and then sends him once again to go watch Samson at the zoo, and he proceeds to go and fly off. And of course, at this point where Tucker wonders how Danny actually knew that would happen, and Danny proceeds to explain how when Skulker integrated his PDA into his suit, and he also gained Danny's schedule, and his suit is now acting on Danny's schedule. He is essentially forced to do what Danny would be doing at any given moment, based on Tucker's schedule. So. And of course, he points out that the next thing that they'll be doing the next thing a little bit ahead of schedule. And pointing out that now it's time for the hunter to become the hunted. And sure enough, Skulker then proceeds to fly off, and he then proceeds to fly off toward the zoo. And he's watching this Samson, what he assumes is Samson in the cage, pointing out that according to his PDA, Danny is supposed to be there, and also expresses his frustration with the PDA, pointing out that he can't reprogram it, so he is stuck being stuck on the schedule of the PDA. He is just following whatever it says without any real choice in the matter, and also points out that he has no idea how to change that. So, but of course, after waiting for Danny for a bit and realizing Danny's not going to show up, he then confronts Samson in his cage and tells him that he was supposed to be the bait for Danny and that Danny was supposed to be there by now, and then expresses to know what he did with the ghost boy. At which point Samson yells at him, pointing out that he's not a stupid gorilla. And because he proceeds to call him a stupid gorilla, but Tucker also proceeds to. It's also revealed that they're wearing a fake pelt for Samson, and it's revealed that Samson's not there and that they tricked him. But of course, he proceeds to get angry at them and proceeds to try and fight them. But Tucker points out that that's not what's going to happen, and then proceeds to use his own PDA to sync up to send new schedule requests to the one on Skulker's arm, and this of course causes Skulker to do a bunch of things that he doesn't want to do, which including, first case in point, Tucker sends him push-ups, which causes him to do push-ups and be defenseless, and he can't stop. And it's at this point where Danny proceeds to attack him, which causes Skulker to be briefly disoriented. But he also points out that that's not going to work again. And tries to attack Danny, but Tucker once again sends him another request to start breakdancing, which of course causes Skulker's armor to be overridden again, and Danny's able to hit him a couple more times again. But eventually, Sam and Danny tells Tucker to stop screwing around and tells him to shut the suit down permanently so that they can defeat Skulker. But of course, Tucker gloats that is completely fine and that it's completely under control. But it's at this point where Skulker figures out what Tucker's doing and shoots the PDA with one of his weapons to disable it. And with Tucker expressing that he had 4 payments on that one as opposed to the 3 he had on the other one, and is now upset. And it is at this point where Danny proceeds to tell Tucker that he's fired as his time manager. Of course, it's this point where Skulker asks Danny if he has any last words, and Danny, realizing he's in a bit of a bind, decides to do something that he knows will save him in a pinch, in a last-ditch effort, and that's that he starts beating his chest like his gorilla and scratching his ass. And of course, Skulker wonders what exactly it is he's doing. At which point, Danny reveals that he's calling a friend, and sure enough, Samson then proceeds to show up. And once again, absolutely beats the shit out of Skulker. And Sam is impressed by Danny for learning his language, but Danny of course points out that all he really does is scratch his ass. So he figured out that that's the best way to get in contact with him. And of course, Sam, Danny, and Tucker then proceed to watch Skulker as he absolutely gets the shit beaten out of him by Samson and has his suit ripped apart piece by piece. But of course, at this point where Tucker then proceeds to point out that there's still something, at least to him, that isn't quite adding up, and that is, why does Skulker have a high-tech suit when he's a ghost? And of course, we then proceed to get that answer, which is that Skulker is in fact teeny tiny. So yeah, he's using a giant mech suit to make himself look bigger and more imposing, but in actuality, he's just this little blob creature that isn't all that big. So, and of course, Skulker then proceeds to express his frustration with Danny, especially since he's tiny now, and proceeds to express that they may have bested him this time, but he will be back and he will eventually capture him and put him on his wall. But of course, it's at this point where Danny merely asks Tucker for the thermos, and he proceeds to suck Skulker inside. And Skulker expresses that he will one day get revenge, and he will one day be free, and then they will see, and that he will get revenge. But he winds up getting sucked into the thermos and is kind of dealt with after that point. He does come back. He is a recurring villain, but he's for the time being he's been dealt with. So But of course, Danny is just happy that the whole nightmare with Skulker is finally over. But of course, Sam points out that he still hasn't figured out anything for the research paper that he needs to write for extra credit. But of course, Danny points out that that's fine, pointing out that even if he, that he caught the bad guy, and saved the gorilla, and so if he doesn't wind up getting a good grade on his paper, then that's all right with him. But then he gets a closer look at Samson and expresses his surprise when he discovers something that the zoo apparently didn't discover in the many years that they've had Samson. And sure enough, the next day there's an article in Women's IQ magazine, which he then hands to Vice Principal Lancer as part of his extra credit. And of course, Vice Principal Lancer proceeds to realize that what we find out is that Danny discovered that Samson is actually Delilah and was a girl the whole time instead of it being two guy gorillas. And of course, Vice Principal Lancer, he reads this and then proceeds to express that zoo is probably the stupidest zoo he has ever heard of, because he points out they should have known better, because it is literally their job to identify animals. and of course they apparently didn't realize that for years. And Danny was of course the first person to figure this out. And Danny just chalks it up to them maybe wanting to respect Samson's privacy. But of course, Vice Principal Lancer is impressed about the fact that Danny essentially risks his life to go to getting up close and personal with a gorilla to figure out something that actual zoologists were unable to figure out for the longest time. So for that, he does decide to raise Danny's grade from a D to a C, which of course Danny expresses his frustration with, almost slipping that he was almost killed by a ghost, but then corrects himself, saying that he was almost attacked by a gorilla, that he was nearly killed by a gorilla, and all he got was a C. And of course, Vice Principal Lancer points out that that maybe next time, if Danny wants to get his grade up, he should go to the library instead of climbing into a gorilla enclosure. And of course, Danny expresses his frustration, pointing out that he really needs somebody to take out his anger on. At which point, the box ghost shows up, and Danny decides that he now has something to channel his unbridled aggression at. At which point, the episode ends with him beating the box ghost into submission. With Tucker adding that he has 5 minutes, which Danny points out is 4 more than he'll need. So he then proceeds to beat up the box ghost, and that's how the episode ends. So yeah, this episode is about the Skulker hunting Danny, and that's about it. That's all you need to know about all of that. It's a fun episode. It's a fun episode because Skulker's a fun villain. I do like him. But it is funny that a recurring bit for him throughout this episode, throughout the latter half of the episode, and I think going into his next appearance as well, is that for the rest of the is that he's just bound to a PDA that he initially stole from Tucker to make himself more powerful, but ultimately wound up being bound to the schedule manager that was on it as an app, and that wound up screwing him over and spelling his downfall. And I do kind of like that. It's a creative way to do like a villain defeat. Because, you know, up until this point, Danny was clearly no match. Up until that point, Danny was clearly no match for the Skulker until his armor started malfunctioning. And Danny was able to use that to his advantage. I do like that as an idea. And I also do like the whole thing where Danny, of course, expresses his frustration. Where of course Danny figures out something that, you know, actual zoologists are paid to figure out. There's a where is it? They're like the idea that they didn't actually figure out Samson was actually a girl this whole time. And I should mention, this is something I know of that actually happens. Like, there was I've been, like, for example, the Camden Aquarium. I've been to the Camden Aquarium. Essentially, the Camden Aquarium has a that's a story thing. The Camden Aquarium, this is a real example, but the Camden Aquarium has a sea turtle named Bob. And Bob, they named before they found out she was a woman. So, you know, Bob is, they kept the name because, you know, they were like, oh, we've always wanted a boy sea turtle at our aquarium, so we're gonna name it Bob. And as it turns out, no, Bob was a woman, and they didn't know that until after they named her. So now there's just a female sea turtle named Bob at the Camden Aquarium, which is funny. But yeah, that's a real world example of that happening. So yeah, it is something that happens. It's just, you know, usually it's a little bit more obvious on, you know, mammals. Sea turtles are a completely different thing. You know, they're a type of, I want to say they're a type of reptile. It's a little bit harder to tell if they're a male or female. But you know, gorilla probably should be a little bit more obvious because, you know, mammals. We're one of those. We should be able to tell our own kind and figure out what exactly is going on down below. But that's gonna do it for my review of Danny Phantom, and we're gonna and once again throughout the rest of the month we're gonna just continue to cover Danny Phantom. So I hope you guys are excited for that. But yeah, this is like the second one I'm reviewing, third overall that you guys have seen. But yeah, we're gonna continue covering Danny Phantom, and I am excited for you guys to see that, to watch my reviews on it. I'm excited to share it with you guys. But yeah, you guys have not seen any of this yet. I'm recording this well in advance, but. Yeah, in any case, that's going to do it for today, so thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below for updates. Be sure to go check those out. Be sure to go and check out my Discord. Link is also down in the description if you want to go hang out. We're also going to be doing a movie on that, or a movie watch-along on that at the end of the month, so I hope you guys are excited for that. But I have to pick a movie, so I will probably do a poll or something. But yeah, if you want to absolutely see that, by all means, link is down in the description. My link is also down in the description. Go check out my Patreon if you want to help support me. And also, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. I will have to rearrange the whole. What is it? I will probably have to rearrange my end screen, but essentially it will be some of the previous ones that I've done. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that. But yeah, in any case, that is gonna do it for today. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. We'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.